So now that we've finished the flame, we can go ahead and merge the flame together with the rest of our the details that we have for the arm. So we can go ahead and merge them together. It looks pretty good. And if we take a look here at our copy node, everything seems to be copying over like it should be. Now that we've finished the arm and the details, it's time to add the miscellaneous features. As we can see in our reference photo, there's a few more features we need to include. The first would be the two bands here in the middle that sort of hold the whole chandelier together. The next would be the canopy here on top, where all of the arms sort of join. And then the last bit would be this ring that you can see here, and that's what would connect the chandelier, to the chain that would hang it down from the ceiling. So we're going to do the bands first, then the canopy, and then the top ring. The bands are pretty simple to do. We're going to start that by making a tube. Now to make the bands, it's going to be really important that we have the this copy node where we can see everything we've done up to this point templated, and that's because the width of the tube depends on how far these are spaced apart. So to get started, let's select the tube. We'll go to our front view, and we will show the handles and kind of move it up into place. We're seeing a little bit of weird clipping going on here. We can fix that by, we'll have to do this anyway, taking the radius of the tube and scaling it down to kind of match the width of what we got for the arms coming together with the chandelier. It's pretty good. And then the height, we're also going to need to bring this down. Let's take a look at our photo one more time. That's probably a good size, at least close enough anyways. And instead of a primitive, we need this to be a polygon. That way we can add some rows to this. We're going to want to add 10 rows, and the reason for this is that if we look the resolution's a little low on this photo, but you can see these three like inset rings in the middle of the band. We're going to put those depressions in this model here. So in order to do that, we will turn on select primitives, and we're going to select all of the rings that we want to bulge out. I should probably explain how I did that. By clicking and dragging, you can select multiple faces, and if you have this eyeball checked here, when you make a box selection, you're only going to select the geometry visible to you. So even though I clicked and dragged a box here, it didn't select anything on the back side. Now if I have it unchecked and I draw a box, it's going to select the things I can see and the polygons on the back side too. Sometimes you do or don't want that functionality, which is why the toggle switch is there. In this case, we would like it to be off so that we can select the front and the back sides of everything. So if you drag a box, select the polygons you want, and then hold down the Shift key. That'll let you add more to your selection. And I'm just kind of dragging a line through here. If you ever make a selection of things, like say you accidentally selected these faces that you didn't need, you can just hold down the control key and click and drag, and that will remove anything you select from your previous selection. So now that we have these 3 middle stripes, we're going to do an extrude again. So let's go to the polygon shelf and click Poly Extrude and bump the scale up. Now this is going to scale it along the y-axis, and we don't really want that because we're getting some intersection now with the faces, and you see by this weird sort of creasing effect that that's going on. So we can fix that by changing the inset. Ooh, not by that much. Changing the inset. A little bit up, and then taking the Y scale down a little bit here. And now we kind of have that roughly banded shape that we have, that depressed shape on the bands here. So now that we have the top one, we need to make the bottom one. And let's go ahead and drop a transform node in just so that we can make sure the top one is in the right position first. So we'll translate it up on the y-axis. And then we're going to drop down another copy node. This copy node's not going to be nearly as complicated as the copy node for the arms. We just want 2 copies here, right? The original and then the new one. And we want the new copy to be translated down to just about that spot. So now if we drop a merge node in, we can connect the bands with the rest of our models. I'm just noticing here that all of the flames on the candle are black. Forgot to address that before. That's because the normals are flipped again. So we need to, whoops. Need to drop in a reverse node right after the transform for our flames, and then those will be all fixed. Okay. Back to the overall miscellaneous details. We've done the bands. Now we need to do the canopy and the ring on top. The canopy looks kind of like the bowl, so we're going to approach it in the same way that we approach the bowl. We're going to start off by making a sphere. Not with the shelf tool. We are going to just drop a sphere down. Let's go ahead and look at that and template everything else. Again, we want a polygon mesh for the sphere so that we can, select the faces more easily. Go to the front view. Delete the faces we don't want. Move the canopy kind of up here to the top where it should go. Now we want to kind of shape it the way that it should be. So it doesn't actually bulge like a bowl here. It actually kind of caves in the other way. So we can actually edit specific parts of the geometry here. I'm going to select the edge selection mode, and what I want to do is I want to select all of these edges right around here so that I can scale them down. And a really nice way to do that in Houdini is we can select one edge, then we can hold down the A key and then left click on the next, or I'm sorry, middle mouse click on the next edge next to it, and it will select the entire loop. So now that we have that, we can get our scale tool out and kind of scale it in. And we'll do that with the next group here. Kind of scale that into. Move it down a bit. Oh. Move it down a bit. Move the top one down. Now we've kind of got that that caved in look. So now there's actually a second tier of bowl on top of it. So to get this straight lip here, we're going to just do an extrusion, but instead of selecting the whole object and hitting extrude, we're actually just going to keep this top ring selected. So if we go back into polygons, select poly extrude, and then we want to scale up on the global y-axis, or rather translate up on the global y-axis, just a little bit. Now we want to push it outwards and make the second layer of the bowl. To do that, we're going to just hit extrude again with the same thing selected. We'll go to our global options. Ooh. So we want to scale in X and Y, but not in, or I'm sorry, X and Z, but not in Y. So we can actually just scale up like this and bring the Y scale back down to 1. Oh, 3.2 is really, really high. Let's try something like 1.5. Oh, even that's too much. How about 1.2? Okay, 1.2 is not bad. We can translate that up a little. Let's check our reference again. Probably one more. You know, this process here isn't really set in stone. I'm just kind of trying to make the shape of this top piece look roughly the same as my reference. That should be a little smaller, like 1.2. 1.2. And then we'll do one final extrude. To get that last little bit of the lip, and again, make sure we check output back. So actually, output back isn't going to work in this scenario because we don't actually have a back of an object to output since we've been cutting it out of a sphere. So instead, we're going to use a different node called polycap. Polycap. This will work better on polygons. So if we select polycap, put that on there, maybe do unique points and triangulate caps just to make sure the mesh is using manifold geometry. We'll be all good. Okay. Okay, now that the canopy is finished, we will add our final detail, which is this ring here on the top. And the ring's going to be really, really easy. We are going to make a torus. Let's just template our canopy here for a second. We're going to take our torus, transform it So we can move it up, and then rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis. We'll probably want to bring its radius down, as well as the uniform scale. So let's go ahead and take our go ahead and detach this merge node that we've previously had. We'll go ahead and add the ring, the canopy, and the bands all to the same merge. And then we can merge our arms with the rest of the details for the chandelier. The canopy is looking a little big in relation to everything else, and the ring's floating. So let's go ahead and, right after the polycap, we can add a transform node. Let's make sure that our merge is templated here so that we can have a size reference. And we'll just scale this down. Here, it'd be easier if we select Move Centroid to Origin again. Scale it down a little bit more. Move the translate about in that position, and that's pretty good for the canopy. Now let's fine-tune the position and the scale of this ring here. And that's pretty good. So now we have the full body of the chandelier. The last thing that we need to do is add the chains. The first step towards making the chain is to make the first individual chain link. After we've made one chain link, we're just going to use a copy node and duplicate it several times the same way that we made the arm. So to get started, we are going to make a box. Just a basic cube. And we're going to change the primitive type to polygon mesh. Let's just go ahead and make it visible here. We're going to give it, just keep it at the 4-axis divisions right now. It'll be enough detail for what we need it to do. And we are going to make the Z size, however, a lot thinner, so that we, have that the chain will be a rather thin profile. And we're going to select in vertex mode. Actually, we can just select all of these vertices, and then get the scale tool. Oop. I want to scale it up on the y-axis here. And then we're going to select the middle strip of vertices and scale it out on the x-axis, just to kind of create a sort of a rough chain shape. This is very circular, and I kind of want it to be more oblong, so we can take the whole thing and sort of scale it up. This is a good starting point for a chain, but as you can see, we have no hole in the middle of it. So we're going to cut a hole out of the chain using a modified version of the object that we've already made. We're going to do this with something called a cookie node. So the cookie operator, you can see it's got 2 boxes up here at the top because it takes 2 inputs. The first input we're going to give it is we're going to give it this shape, and then the second input we're going to give it is we're going to edit this shape a little bit to cut a hole out of itself that is its same shape. It would probably be easier if we just did it and took a look at it. So we're going to make a transform node, the edit node feeds into. And let's just let's template the edit node and then view the transform node. We're going to want to scale it down roughly to how big we think this hole should be. And then on the z-axis, we're actually going to scale it up just to make sure that it punches a hole all the way through. So again, the input for the cookie is the first input is going to be the original box shape that we had here at the edit node, and then the second input is going to be this the shape of the hole that we want cut out. So at first glance, it didn't do at all what we wanted it to do. In fact, it looks a lot like a merge node here, and that's because its operation type is union, which means join input A and input B. What we actually want is we want A minus B, so that it takes the first object and cuts the second object out of it, and now we have sort of a chain shape. If we wanted to make the chain shape a little rounder on the edges, we could do is go to the select edges mode, select the loops in the same way that we selected them before, and we can add a poly bevel from the polygon shelf tools, and maybe increase the relative inset a little bit and give it one or two, maybe just one repetition. That way there's just a little more detail there on the edges. If we turn the bevel type to high density round here, you can see that now instead of corners on the edges, we've got these sort of tight rounded edges. Okay, now that we have our chain link modeled, we're going to want to merge this. With the rest of our models. And again, we're going to want to add a transform node just so that our chain link is scaled and positioned properly so that it matches up with our ring. So we'll scale it down. Looks like it needs to be rotated 90 degrees on the y-axis. And we can just kind of place our ring there our chain there to match up with the ring, and everything looks good. So let's add our copy node for the multiple pieces of the chain now. We're going to want to put this in right here before the merge. So let's drop our copy in, and we're going to do another thing really similar to how we did the arms for the chandelier. So to start, let's just say we'll have 5 chain links to start with. So the number of copies will be 5. Or actually, let's do 2. It'll be a lot easier to do 2 and then change the number later, so that we're only working with 2 to begin with. So first of all, it's every piece, every time it's copied, is always going to be rotated 90 degrees, because that's how a chain works. And then it's going to want to translate up on the y-axis enough so that it's just touching. The previous piece of the chain. So that looks pretty good. And actually, this will work right out of the box as is. We can drag the number of copies up, and the chain will go up and up and up and up. But there is a small problem with this, and I think you can kind of see it here. As we add more chains, the chain just kind of grows upwards. And really, if you think about it, if we had made this chandelier and we were trying to place it, let's say with a ceiling, we could actually even visualize that very quickly here. Let's go out to the object level and add a box. And let's make its Y size maybe 0.1 and its X and Z size at like 5. Ooh, not 51. So say we've got our chandelier and we put it, perfectly in place how we want it hanging from the ceiling, and then we actually think, oh, you know what? It should be hanging closer to the floor. So we go into our chandelier and we increase the number of copies of the chain, maybe say like 24. Now we have a problem because the chain is sticking up through the ceiling, and so in order to edit the chandelier to be in the proper position, we have to go back up here and we have to take its Y position. We have to find exactly where the chain meets, and that's just not a very convenient way of working. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit more with expressions, so that when we add and remove chain links, it actually drops down from the top instead of instead of having the chain just shoot up through the ceiling. So how do we do that? Well, we need to add another channel reference to transform the entire chandelier, chain and all, downwards on the y-axis based on the number of chains. So it's going to be the number of chains multiplied by the height of one chain. And then it actually needs to be negative, or else the whole chandelier would move up instead of down. However, referencing channels isn't going to work the same way that it did with the arms, because what we want to do here is we want a transform node, and we want the Y translate, right, to move up and down based on the number of chains. But if we look at the copy here and look at the number of copies, let's first of all change this to a more manageable number like 5. If we hover over, remember number of copies is NCY, but if we try to type in NCY in translate here, let's do $NCY, you see that the value is red, and that's because it doesn't know what the number of copies is. And as a matter of fact, this whole node just turns striped red, which means that there's a problem with something. Referencing channels in the way that we did with when we copied the arms, that only works when you're referencing a channel within the same node. When you need to reference a channel in a different node, you actually have to do it in a different way. And here's how you do it. So let's go find the parameter first that we want to reference. It's this number of copies. We can right-click in the box and say copy parameter. Now if we go down to the transform, and remember we want to modify the Y translation, we can delete the 0, right-click, and say paste copied relative references. Now you can see that actually did something. So what do we have here? Well, you can see if you look at the value that was pasted in the translate Y, you can actually see how the channel reference is being done. So it actually looks very similar to a file path that you would maybe see in Windows. The 2 dots just going up one level, the copy 3 referencing this specific copy 3 node, and then the final NCY that was the parameter here for number of copies, right? It said parameter is NCY. And in this case, it's not using the dollar sign with the capital letters as a variable. This is actually a straight reference to the actual path. But it works in exactly the same way. So remember, our math here is the number of chains multiplied by the height of one chain, and then the negative of that. So we have the number of chains here. We need to multiply it by the height of one chain. So the height of one chain is this translate y. If we hover over it, it says the parameters is tx, ty, and tz. So we need to reference ty. So back here in the transform, we can actually just copy this first reference, and then instead of ncy, we will do ty. And then all of that needs to be multiplied by -1. So what did that give us? Now when we select our copy node and move the number of copies up and down, we can see that the chandelier moves up and down with the number of copied links. You can see these chain links here at the top aren't actually models. It's just, since we have the copy selected, it's sort of templating the wireframes here. If we deselect it, you can see that only the links right at the origin point of this chandelier are actually being added, and so we now have the functionality that we want. The final step in this whole process is adding custom parameters. So it's going to be very difficult to change the properties of this chandelier, right? If you were handed this model and then you said, "Oh shoot, actually we need 4 arms, or we need 8 arms," and then the chain length is all wrong. Well, you'd have to take the chandelier, you'd have to open it up, and you'd have to go into this giant node network and find, the exact nodes that you wanted to edit, and that would just be a long and painful process. Instead, what if there was a way to select the chandelier and have, up here in the parameters view, a way to edit those couple of different values that we want? Well, there actually is, and Houdini gives us a way to make custom parameters here in the scene view and link them to different parameters in the geometry view. So inside the scene view, let's just select the chandelier object, click up here on this gear, and say Edit Parameter Interface. This looks a little daunting at first, but it's actually a pretty simple thing to wrap your head around. If you look here in the middle, this column says Existing Parameters. We can see there's a transform, a material. Let's just collapse these so they're easier to see. Transform, material, render, and miscellaneous. Well, over here in the parameters view, we also have transform tab, material tab, render tab, and miscellaneous tab. You may see where we're going with this. If we add a folder to the existing parameters here and call it something like chandelier and say apply, we now have a chandelier tab over here, and it's empty, but in a minute we're going to add a couple of the custom parameters so that we can change the number of arms and the length of the chain without having to dive down into the geometry level. So there are all sorts of parameter types here, and this is actually something that you could spend a whole lot of time customizing different things. We're actually just going to do 2 simple things here. We're going to add 2 different integers. So we'll select integer and move it over, drag it to make sure it's underneath the chandelier. So it's showing us just these 2 default labels right now. So under the parameter tab, label is the name of the parameter, and then name is just sort of like the Houdini behind the scenes name that it refers to. So the first label that we want to create is number of arms. So we'll just type number of arms, And then the name, we'll do it something like num arms. Oop. And then for the second parameter, we will call it chain length. And for the name, we'll just call it the same thing, chain length. Now, for the number of arms, we're going to want to go to the Channels tab, and it's got a default value here, which is 0. Our chandelier has 6 arms, so we're going to just give it a default value of 6. Now, right next to it, you can see linked channels. Right now, the linked channels is empty. What we want to do is we want to link it to that very first copy node we made that duplicated all of these arms around the chandelier. So let's, with this window up here, let's dive into the chandelier view and actually expand the network node just a little bit so that we can see, and zoom in and go down to this copy 1 node. The 6 right here is the number of copies, and so we want this 6 here to actually control this parameter. So if we click on number of copies and drag it onto where it says drop parameters here to add new links, you'll see that it's created a linked channel. And now all we need to do is go to the chain length, find our third copy node, and do the same thing. We're going to link the number of copies. Here, we should give it a default of like 5. We're going to link the number of copies to this parameter. We'll just say apply and accept, which will close the window. Now let's go back up to the object level and see what we have. We have this tab called chandelier. We'll take off the grid here. We've got this tab called chandelier, and it has our 2 controls here, number of arms and chain length. So you can see if we drag number of arms left and right, we can have a chandelier with any arbitrary number of arms, and if we increase or decrease the chain length, it will drop the chandelier up and down the way we wanted it to go. And that's about it for this lesson. The next lesson is going to cover attributes in Houdini, which is one of the most flexible, powerful, and important tools that the program has to offer. Take care.